The sound was wrong before anything else was. Not the dull roar of the turbofans humming somewhere beneath the aluminum skin of the plane, not the recycled hiss of cabin air pushing through overhead vents. It was a different sound, a wet, muffled thud. The kind of sound 180 pounds of unconscious human body makes when it slumps sideways in a seat and then tips forward, forehead meeting the tray table with a knock that cut through the ambient noise of Atlantic Flight 3300 like a blade. Nadia Okafor was awake before the flight attendant's head even turned. She had been half asleep in seat 24C, a middle seat, because she'd booked late, and middle was what remained. Her neck pillow, a crumpled foam horseshoe around her collar, a half-watched documentary, muted on the seatback screen in front of her. She was off duty. She was wearing civilian clothes. Faded jeans, a gray Air Force Pararescue Association hoodie, and worn trail runners with loose laces. She had been awake for 22 hours. First on a 6-hour drive down from Colorado Springs to Denver International, then a 2-hour delay due to a ground stop, then the boarding crush, then this. The flight to Chicago was supposed to take 2 hours and 40 minutes. They were 58 minutes in. She had wanted to sleep through the rest. But the sound landed in some deep-wired part of her brain that didn't know how to sleep. Not really, not anymore. The part trained through 4 deployments and 1,000 iterations of combat search and rescue to classify ambient noise in milliseconds. That sound was not benign. She was unbuckled and on her feet before the man in 22B stopped rattling. He was in his late 50s, heavy-built, ruddy-complexioned, a charcoal business suit with the jacket folded on the overhead shelf. His name, Nadia would learn later, was Dennis. He'd ordered a Bloody Mary 40 minutes after takeoff and had been absorbed in spreadsheets on a laptop. Now he was folded forward over his tray table, his left arm hanging slack off the armrest, fingers loose, his color going wrong, in a way that took years of emergency medicine to read, but was absolutely unmistakable once you'd been trained to see it. The gray-blue tinge creeping into his lips, the total muscular collapse that isn't sleep and isn't fainting, the stillness that belongs only to the very deeply unconscious. Nadia stepped past the woman in 24B, without a word, pressed one hand flat against Dennis's shoulder, and eased him upright in the seat, already pressing 2 fingers to the carotid on his neck. His pulse was there, weak, irregular, fast, but present. She tilted his head back, opened his airway, watched his chest, shallow breathing, pupils, when she peeled one eyelid back, were unequal. Her hand moved to his wrist, found it clammy and cold. She straightened up and looked around for a flight attendant. "I need help up here," she said, loud and direct, projecting into the noise of the cabin. "This man is having a medical emergency." The flight attendant, a young man named Marcus, his name tag silver against a navy vest, was already moving up the aisle from the galley with the stretched expression of someone who had handled motion sickness and nothing worse. He reached 22B and looked down at Dennis. Then he looked at Nadia. His eyes moved to her hoodie, her loose laces, her absolute lack of anything that said medical authority. "Mom, we're trained for this? He's unresponsive with unequal pupils, a thready pulse, and he's cyanotic around the lips," Nadia said, keeping her voice even. "I need to know what medical equipment you have on board right now." AED, O2, an emergency medical kit. "Is there a physician on this aircraft?" Marcus blinked. "I need to ask you to. I'm a pararescueman with the United States Air Force. I need the kit, and I need it now." He materialized from row 18, and she felt him before she saw him. A particular body language signature, shoulders squared in that specific way of a man who had been granted authority and had practiced using it, a federal badge already coming out of a waistband rig before he'd cleared the aisle. His name, she would learn, was Agent Harlan Beck, and he was a federal air marshal who had been on this route 4 times that month and had never had anything worse than an aggressive passenger who didn't want to be told his oversized carry-on needed to be checked. He was competent at his job. His job was not medicine. "Air Marshal," he said, flashing the badge. "Ma'am, step away from the passenger and return to your seat. This is a controlled situation. It's a controlled situation with a man who's about to deteriorate into a full cardiac event if we don't establish an airway and get oxygen on him in the next 2 minutes," Nadia said. She didn't raise her voice. There was a frequency. Certain people learn to use in high-stakes environments. Not loud, not aggressive, just implacably precise, and she'd had that frequency so long it had become her default setting. Beck's jaw tightened. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Beck. Beck looked at Nadia, her jeans, her worn sneakers. He took a measured breath. "We have a first-aid certified flight attendant on board. We don't need a random passenger doing whatever she thinks she's doing. First-aid certification means she knows how to apply a bandage," Nadia said. She was already reaching past Beck, pressing 2 fingers back to Dennis's carotid, watching his chest. "His rhythm is changing. If he codes in this seat, without a defibrillator on him, we are going to have a dead man, and you are going to spend 6 months explaining why you stopped the only person on this aircraft who could have saved him." "Ma'am, sit down, lady." Beck said the words came out flat, not unkind, but with a finality to them, the tone of a man who believed he was being reasonable. "You'll just get in." Not the words. The door was sealed, the radio traffic internal, but the intercom crackled overhead, and then the captain's voice came through the cabin speakers with a deliberate calm that did not mask the urgency underneath. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation in the main cabin. We are asking all non-essential personnel to clear the rows around row 22 and allow our crew to assist. If there is a medical professional on board, please identify yourself to a flight attendant." That was Marcus's moment of grace. He turned from Beck and walked 2 steps to the forward galley phone. Nadia could hear the exchange, low and rapid. The captain information being passed. A pause, while Nadia kept 2 fingers on Dennis's pulse and used her other hand to tilt his head and listen to his breathing. Now slower, more labored, each exhale slightly wet. Pulmonary edema, she thought. The unequal pupils were the thing that kept pulling her attention. Left middle cerebral artery territory, maybe. He needed a CT scanner and a neurology team, and he needed them in the next 40 minutes, not 3 hours from now when the plane landed in Chicago. At the original schedule, Marcus came back from the galley. He didn't look at Beck. "Captain wants her to take the lead," Marcus said. "He says we divert to St. Louis. If she says divert, he wants her assessment." Beck's face went through 3 distinct expressions in the span of 2 seconds. The second was something that looked like wounded authority. The third settled into a controlled professionalism, a man who knew when the chain of command had just reassigned above his pay grade. He stepped back. But he stepped back. "Tell me what you need," Marcus said. The emergency medical kit came out of the forward closet in a red hard case, and Nadia had it unlatched and her hands inside before it was fully on the floor. She worked fast and economical. No wasted motion. The waste of motion was the thing that the 17 years had trained out of her. 4 years in active PJ duty before the Air Force made her a JTAC qualified medic, then combat search and rescue rotations in Afghanistan and Syria, casualty evacuation from the backs of HH-60G Pave Hawks at altitude. The whole brutal curriculum of the United States Air Force Pararescue pipeline that broke most people in the first 3 months. All of it had taught her that in a medical emergency, every movement had to count. She found what she needed. Oxygen, thankfully a portable cylinder and a non-rebreather mask, standard on U.S. domestic carriers. A bag valve mask, in case he stopped breathing entirely. A blood pressure cuff. No IV kit with needles in the standard flight kit, which was the limitation she'd been expecting, but she had what mattered most. She got the mask on Dennis's face and opened the O2 to 15 liters per minute in you. His color shifted almost immediately, the gray-blue retreating from his lips, the skin around his eyes losing some of that waxy stillness. She squeezed the BVM twice, watching his chest rise, then let the mask take over. She cuffed his arm, pumped it up, listened. 82 over 54. Too low, not tank crashing low, but bad enough. She turned to the woman who'd been in the window seat, next to Dennis, middle-aged, steady expression. The kind of person who wasn't panicking because they were too frightened to move. "What did he drink?" Nadia asked. "Just a Bloody Mary," the woman said. "Did he say anything beforehand? Headache? Neck pain? Any weakness in his arms or face? He said his head hurt. Maybe 20 minutes ago. I thought he was just tired." The headache, the sudden loss of consciousness, the blown pupil. She'd seen it enough times on casualty extractions that the pattern was written into her like muscle memory. He needed fibrinolytic therapy and imaging, but she was in an aluminum tube at 38,000 feet, and she was going to work with what she had. She hit the intercom button on the seat back and held it. "Captain, I need you on the radio to Medlink. He's showing signs of acute hemorrhagic or ischemic stroke. Blown left pupil. Sudden onset loss of consciousness. Blood pressure 82 over 54. I need physician ground support and I'm recommending immediate divert to Lambert. What's your fuel state?" The captain came back in less than 30 seconds. "We have fuel for divert. Medlink doctor is being patched through now. You have command of the medical situation. What else do you need?" "Clear the 2 rows behind 22. I need space if he fully codes. And I need whoever can find a doctor or nurse on this plane to do it right now. Work the whole cabin, both aisles, announce it twice." 3 rows behind her, a woman raised her hand. An ER nurse from Kansas City, returning from a wedding, still in a rumpled bridesmaid dress. She'd pulled a cardigan over. She came forward without hesitation, and Nadia put her to work immediately. Monitor the BVM rate, watch the pupils every 90 seconds, call any change in skin color or breathing rhythm. Nadia moved her own hands to the AED, got the pads positioned correctly on Dennis's chest, right clavicle, left lateral, and powered it on. It analyzed his rhythm and held. Irregular but not shockable. 2 rows forward, a retired Army medic in his 60s, a stocky man named Bert in a fishing vest who moved to the aisle with the weary practicality of someone who'd done this before in considerably worse places. She gave him the BVM and spent 45 seconds walking him through the compression-to-breath ratio she wanted. 15:2. Same as adult cardiac protocol. Keep the seal tight. Watch for chest rise. Tell me if he resists. Bert nodded once and got to work. His technique was dated in 2 specific ways that told her he'd been out of active medicine for at least a decade, but his hands were steady and his judgment was sound. She corrected him once and he didn't argue. That was enough. She stayed on Dennis's pulse. 2 fingers at the carotid, counting, feeling the quality of each beat. The rhythm was irregular in a way that made her think atrial fibrillation, not unusual in a stroke presentation, often accompanying it or precipitating it, but the rate was not accelerating the way it would if he were heading toward ventricular fibrillation. Not PEA, not pulseless electrical activity, not yet, but she could feel the uncertainty in each beat, the cardiac muscle doing something that felt like a question rather than a statement. The meddling physician came through on the captain's radio relay. She spoke for 90 seconds, precise and stripped of everything, not essential mechanism. Timeline, vital trends, neurosigns, current interventions, her clinical impression. The doctor listened without interrupting, asked 2 clarifying questions about the pupil asymmetry and the blood pressure trend, and then agreed with her assessment. Probable ischemic stroke with possible hemorrhagic component, given the blown left pupil. Divert recommended, watch for any deterioration in breathing quality. No chest compressions unless pulse is lost. Get him to a stroke center, she acknowledged, committed the parameters to memory, and went back to Dennis. Beck had disappeared from her immediate space and reappeared 2 rows back. At some point, she didn't catch exactly when because her focus was on the man in front of her and not on the peripheral social architecture of the cabin, she became aware that he had gone quiet and functional. He was keeping passengers in their seats with the firm low-key authority that came naturally to someone trained in crowd management under pressure. He cleared the aisle of the 3 people who had gotten up to look. He redirected a woman with a toddler who was trying to pass through. He told people to sit down and buckle in with a voice that didn't leave space for negotiation. It was not what he'd been trained to do in a medical emergency, but it was useful, and he was doing it competently. She registered it and moved on. Dennis's blood pressure came up slightly after 10 minutes on high-flow oxygen, 90/60. Still not great. Still not where she wanted it, but trending in the right direction. The O2 was helping. The airway was maintained. The body was working. His breathing steadied into a shallow but consistent rhythm. The pupils remained unequal, left wider than right, which was the piece that kept pulling her back. Unequal pupils, in an unconscious patient, generally meant intracranial pressure with some component of herniation risk. Brain tissue being pushed through openings it wasn't designed to pass through by swelling or bleeding you couldn't see from the outside. But his chest was rising and falling in a pattern that wasn't fighting her. And the AED was not reporting a shockable rhythm, and the numbers were moving the right direction. Then his hand moved. It was small. Just the fingers of his right hand twitching against the seat fabric. A brief, uncoordinated flutter that was not a reflex arc, but something more purposeful. The way a person moves when there is intention behind it. The brain was still in there, still trying to drive the vehicle from whatever dark and pressurized room it was currently locked inside. Nadia put her hand over his right hand and squeezed once, firm and deliberate. "Dennis, you're okay. You're on a plane. We're landing very soon. Stay with me." His eyes didn't open, but the twitching beneath her palm settled, and then slowly the pressure shifted, fingers curling, not randomly but with direction, pressing back against her hand. He was squeezing back. She didn't allow herself to exhale, not yet. Squeezing back was not the same as stable, and it was not the same as cleared. But it was the brain reaching through the emergency to make contact, and she held his hand and counted beats and watched the AED screen and kept her face neutral. "Captain," she said on the intercom, "patient is maintaining. Keep the divert. I want wheels on the ground in St. Louis in 20 minutes or less." 14 minutes out, the captain replied. his voice carrying the particular controlled steadiness of a commercial pilot, doing exactly what he was trained to do. "Runway is clear. EMS is staged at the pad." There was a moment, maybe 8 minutes out from Lambert, when the plane banked into its descent and the cabin angle shifted, and Nadia had to brace against the seat back to keep her position over Dennis. And in that moment of stillness, with the aircraft tilting toward the Missouri morning. Pavehawk, 2019. Kuna Province. They'd extracted a Marine corpsman with a femoral hit from a hot LZ at 6,000 feet, and Nadia had worked him for the entire 43-minute flight, with the crew chief's hand on her shoulder, keeping her from sliding off the deck, and he'd been alive when the wheels hit Bagram. She'd walked off that aircraft and gone directly to the hangar, and sat on a tie-down ring and stared at her hands for 15 minutes and couldn't tell whether she was feeling triumph or terror, or something that lived exactly between them. She thought about the pipeline, about what it had taken to earn the beret. Most people don't know that Air Force Pararescue is one of the most demanding special operations career fields in the United States military, with attrition rates during the selection and training pipeline. It starts with an indoctrination course, INDOC, that makes most other branches' physical selection courses look like a warm-up. 2 months of sustained runs that begin before sunrise and end after dark. Open water swims in pools kept deliberately cold, rucking with weighted packs across terrain that punishes your knees, and a sustained campaign of psychological pressure designed not to identify who is the most physically gifted in the room, but who will keep working when every rational part of the brain is screaming to stop. The instructors in INDOC are not interested in the people who are strong. They are interested in the people who are still functional when strength is gone. Those are different populations, and most people are surprised to learn which one they belong to. Those who survive INDOC move to the pipeline proper, combat dive school, jump school for static line and free-fall airborne operations, SERE training, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, which is the kind of course that personnel who've been through it decline to describe in detail at dinner parties. Then the Special Operations Combat Medic course at Fort Bragg, the same curriculum Army Special Forces 18D medics complete, which is the equivalent of a civilian paramedic program in terms of clinical content, but compressed into an accelerated format. 800 hours of clinical medicine, surgical airways, hemorrhage control under field conditions, pediatric emergencies, tension pneumothorax, burn management OB emergencies in non-clinical settings, trauma management with no hospital, no pharmacy, no imaging suite, no consulting physician, just what you carry in a kit and what you can do with your hands and your training, and that's before the field evaluations, the unit assignment, the deployment workup, and the actual operational rotations. The full pipeline from INDOC to operational assignment takes roughly 2 years. Nadia had completed it and spent the 17 years afterward building a clinical and operational record that was indexed in files she never expected to need to reference again. The creed is 4 words, that others may live, not a recruiting slogan, an operational mandate. The reason Pararescuemen exist is to go into the worst places on Earth to recover the people no one else can reach, and to keep those people alive on the way back out. It is a career field that demands that you be simultaneously an elite combat operator capable of inserting into denied territory and an emergency medical provider of equivalent caliber to a civilian paramedic or flight medic, and that you be both things at once under fire with incomplete information and inadequate equipment, Nadia had trained for 4 years before she touched a real casualty in a real environment. She'd been in grade for 13 years after that. The specific weight of that competence, the way it organized itself in your nervous system, the way it made certain kinds of situations feel slower than they actually were, had never left her. She'd just been carrying it in civilian clothes. She thought about her first CCT, her combat controller, the taciturn tech sergeant from Mississippi, who'd looked at her on day 2 of the pipeline and told her she was probably going to quit. She'd kept that in her back pocket like a stone, taken it out, and felt the weight of it every time she wanted to stop. She hadn't quit. She graduated in the top third of her class and spent the next decade and a half collecting operational hours that would have been classified if anyone had ever thought to ask. She was retired now, technically. A medical consulting role at a veterans advocacy organization, a part-time adjunct instructor slot at a community college EMS program, a life that fit in a 2-bedroom apartment in Denver that still felt too quiet. She'd come from visiting her sister in Phoenix. She hadn't planned on working this flight. The wheels hit the runway at Lambert St. Louis International at 7:22 in the morning, and the aircraft braked hard and swung toward the remote pad where the ground EMS team was already positioned. 2 ambulances, 1 fire truck, a cluster of vests and blue gloves. Nadia kept her hands on Dennis through the taxi. His BP had come up to 104/68. His pupils remained unequal, which was the piece she kept turning over, but his breathing was clean, and his hand was still responding to pressure, and his color had normalized. He hadn't coded. He was alive and stable and needed a CT scanner and a neurology team the moment the door opened. She gave the report to the first paramedic through the aircraft door, in 30 seconds flat: mechanism, timeline, neurosigns, vitals progression, oxygen therapy, the MedLink physician's recommendations. The paramedic, young, serious, efficient, nodded and moved, and within 4 minutes Dennis was on a stretcher and rolling down the air bridge toward the terminal with 2 medics bracketing him. Nadia stepped back. Bert, the army medic, appeared at her elbow and handed her a bottle of water without a word. She drank half of it standing in the aisle. Beck came down the aisle toward her. He stopped when he reached her row. He had the expression of a man preparing to say something he'd been rehearsing for the last 20 minutes. "Aye?" he started. "You cleared the aisle and kept the cabin manageable," Nadia said. "That helped. Thank you." He looked at her for a moment. "I didn't know. Nobody did," she said. "It's fine." She sat down in the seat she'd barely used in the last 40 minutes. She could feel the adrenaline leaving. It went the same way it always went. Not all at once, but in stages. Like water draining from a bathtub, leaving behind a residue of exhaustion that felt almost pleasant, the specific tiredness of a body that had been used fully and well. She was looking for her neck pillow, which had fallen somewhere under 24B, when she heard them. Boots, the kind of boots that cost $400 and were worth every cent. Bates' 8-inch side zip, she thought without looking up. She knew. The sound had worn it for 17 years. On a tile floor in an airport terminal, they made a sound that was specific and recognizable to a certain type of ear, in the same way that specific caliber weapons made a specific sound. She looked up. There were 5 of them, standing in the jetbridge doorway, still in their duty gear. Olive drab cargo pants, dry-fit tops. The distinctive maroon berets tilted to the right. They were waiting at the gate, not boarding, standing in that particular economy of posture that PJs had when they were officially off the clock but could never fully turn off. The one at the front had a patch on his left shoulder. Blue shield, white parachute, the angel wings on either side. He wasn't looking at the aircraft, he was looking at her. She recognized him the way you recognize people you haven't seen in 6 years. Not instantly, but in a sequence, piece by piece, the details assembling from memory until they made a face. Staff Sergeant Dario Reyes. They'd been in the same squadron at Davis-Monthan before she transitioned out. He'd been a kid when she'd first met him, one of the young PJs coming up through the pipeline, 23 and absolutely certain of his own invincibility, in the way only 23-year-old combat operators can be. She'd been his flight lead on his first real extraction. He was 30 now, or close to it, and he had 3 years more operational gravity in his face, but the same stillness in his hands. It took her a moment to process it. It was a beret, maroon, folded the specific way you fold a beret when you're holding it with intent, not tucking it under an epaulet. He stepped from the jetbridge into the aircraft doorway. "Staff Sergeant Okafor?" he said. The title was wrong by 3 grades. She'd been a master sergeant when she retired. But it came out with a weight that wasn't about rank. It was about acknowledgement. "We heard you had an interesting flight." Marcus, the flight attendant, was standing 6 feet away with his mouth open. The ER nurse from Kansas City, still in 25B, had her phone raised halfway, as if she'd been recording something, and forgotten whether she was allowed to. Nadia looked at Dario. "Where did you?" "Captain called it in on the Medlink frequency," Dario said. "We were staging 4 gates over. Combat TACP rotation, heading back to Hurlburt. Duty officer got the traffic, ran the name. Turned out we had a PJ alum working a medical code on a commercial aircraft at 38,000 feet. He paused. "The squadron sends its regards." One of the other 4, a woman, short and formidable, a tactical air control party, patch on her sleeve, stepped forward. "You're the one who ran the code?" she said. "I ran the code," Nadia said. The woman, she had Vasquez on her name tape, looked her up and down in the rapid assessment way of someone who spent their professional life evaluating who could be counted on in a hard moment, and then she nodded once. It wasn't a small thing. A nod from a TACP operator was not a small thing. Dario held out the beret. "We had a spare," he said. "Figured you might want to have one on you, since you were clearly still working." She didn't reach for it immediately. She sat in 24C with the empty water bottle in her hand and the neck pillow retrieved from under the seat in front of her and her trail runners with the loose laces. And she looked at the 5 of them standing in the jet bridge, maroon berets tilted right, and the morning light from the terminal windows coming through behind them. The beret felt like a long way from the conference call schedule and the community college EMS lecture on pediatric airway management she had. Next Tuesday, she stood up. She took the beret. There is a thing that happens to people who've been shaped by high-intensity operational environments when they step out of them. The world continues at its ordinary pace, traffic patterns and grocery runs and work calendars, and they carry inside them a set of calibrations for emergencies that have no current application. The skills stay sharp, but go unemployed. The wiring stays live, but finds nothing to connect to. Nadia had spent 2 years figuring out that this wasn't a deficiency. It was just a condition of the transition, and it was manageable with enough patience and enough work and enough mornings where you ran until the noise inside settled to something bearable. She'd joined the Air Force at 19, wanting to be a nurse. She'd grown up in Houston's 3rd Ward. the second of 4 daughters of a Ghanaian-American father who was a cardiologist, and an American mother who had been an Army LPN before she became a teacher. And the language of medicine had been spoken in their house the way other houses spoke sports or religion, with the assumption that everyone in the room understood the terms. She'd been wrapping wounds since she was 9. She'd been reading her father's cardiology journals since she was 12, not always understanding them, but understanding that understanding them would matter someday. She'd seen the PJ recruiting poster at the MEPS station in Houston on a Tuesday afternoon in March, a square of glossy paper mounted on a corkboard between an Army Ranger recruiting flyer and a Navy nuclear technician ad. It showed a man in a wetsuit ascending from open ocean with a diver below him, and in small text at the bottom, "That others may live." She'd stood in front of it for 7 minutes, long enough for the MEPS clerk to walk past her twice, and the second time ask if she needed something. She said no and signed the papers 2 days later. Her recruiter had told her the attrition rate. He'd told her again as if she hadn't understood. She nodded again. He spent 4 more minutes explaining that it was not a nurse track and would not lead to a nursing assignment. She told him she understood and signed the papers. The pipeline took 2 years between the INDOC and the training courses and the Special Operations Medical Training at Fort Bragg, the same program Army Special Forces medics go through, the 18D course, 800 hours of clinical and field medicine, surgical airways, hemorrhage control, pediatric emergencies, trauma management in resource-limited environments, everything compressed and front-loaded with physical selection pressure so that by the time you took your first real clinical rotation. She graduated in 2007, a year before the surge in Afghanistan that would define the next decade of the operational tempo in her career field. She deployed to Afghanistan in 2008, 2010, and 2013. She specialized in night CSAR, combat search and rescue, the missions that went in after pilots down in denied territory, after special operations personnel separated from their units, after the situations that the regular evacuation channels couldn't reach. She worked out of the back of HH-60G Pave Hawks and MC Quan 130s, and once, memorably, out of a vehicle convoy in Helmand Province that had not been part of the original extraction plan. She received the Airman's Medal in 2011 for an extraction under fire in Kunar that she was not permitted to discuss in specific terms. She received the Air Medal with Valor device in 2016 for a CSAR mission in northern Syria that recovered 2 Navy SEALs and a CIA contractor from a compound that had been under fire. She retired at 41, medically cleared, with minor residual hearing loss in her right ear from a decade and a half of Pave Hawk noise that no amount of hearing protection fully mitigated. She was consulting with veterans advocacy organizations and teaching emergency medicine to paramedic students in Denver when she boarded Flight 3300 with her neck pillow and her muted documentary. The man in seat 22B had a plan to work through the flight. Neither plan survived boarding. She thought about Dennis as she stood in the jetbridge with Dario and the 4 others. The ER nurse from Kansas City had given her an update on the way off the plane. EMTs had him on the ambulance ramp, responsive to verbal, right arm moving weakly, probably ischemic, probably going to make it, or some version of it. These things were never certain from the tarmac, but the odds were better than they'd been at 7:18 a.m. when he was gray-blue and folded over a tray table. She'd taken a man who was dying and moved him incrementally toward alive. That was the only metric. They stood at the end of the jet bridge, while the airline staff worked through the passenger deplaning process around them, and Dario told her what had happened on the ground side. The captain had called the divert at 7:03. Ground control at Lambert had needed a medical designation for the incoming, Priority Medical, which triggered a notification to the Terminal Operations Center. The Operations Center had a channel that went to the Airport Emergency Medical Coordinator, who had a relationship with the military staging area where Dario's unit was rotating through. Someone in the chain, he didn't know who, had thought to check whether the medical situation on the aircraft involved military personnel, and had run the captain's description of the person running the code against the duty roster. There was no duty roster, obviously. She was retired, but the description, female, Air Force Pararescue Association hoodie, identifying herself as a pararescueman, had been enough for someone with a phone and the right contacts to make 4 calls in 12 minutes. The duty officer wanted someone there to receive you, Dario said. She said it didn't feel right for you to walk off the plane alone. Nadia turned that over for a moment. She's never met me, Nadia said. No, Dario said. But she knows what a PJ is. That was the specific thing about the career field. There was a community built around the creed, and the creed didn't expire at retirement. The 4 words applied, regardless of whether you were currently drawing active duty pay. They applied at 38,000 feet on a commercial flight when a man in a business suit made a sound that was not right and you were already awake enough to hear it. That others may live. She ran her thumb along the fold of the beret. How'd he end up? One of the others asked. He was young, maybe 25, the youngest face in the group. New to operational flying, she thought. The wide-open eyes of someone who'd graduated the pipeline recently. Enough that the pride was still raw. BP was stabilizing when they took him off, Nadia said. He was responding. He needs imaging and a neurology team. The young one nodded with a kind of reverence that she recognized and didn't quite know what to do with. She'd had it once herself, standing in the shadow of people who'd been in the operational world long enough to have the weight of it on them. She hadn't known yet what that weight would eventually cost. You should come back in, the young one said. We need people who can do what you did. She looked at him. He was completely serious. You need people who are 23 years old and can pass the swim events, she said. Ma'am, Vasquez said respectfully, the swim events are not the hard part. There was a beat of recognition, shared laughter, the kind that runs in the same register as grief and professionalism, and too many operational hours and the particular dark humor of people who spend time in proximity to death. Beck appeared at the far end of the jetbridge. He'd followed the deplaning crowd through, and he stood at the junction with the terminal concourse with his badge back in his waistband and his jacket rebuttoned and his face doing something uncomfortable. He looked at Nadia. He made a choice. He walked toward her. He stopped 2 feet away and extended his hand. She took it. I was wrong to dismiss you, he said. His jaw was tight, which meant the words were costing him something. Good, she thought, not out of spite. Cost was the mechanism by which information became permanent. You ran a textbook medical emergency in a completely compromised environment. You got out when it counted, she said. He nodded once. She released his hand. He moved into the terminal. Marcus caught up with her at the gate door. He looked younger than he had in the cabin, which was the after effect of sustained crisis on a face that wasn't used to it. The captain wants me to tell you, Marcus said, holding out the bag, that he has filed a passenger heroism commendation with the airline, and that he said the training he got said to trust the professional, and he regrets. It took him 90 seconds to override. Agent Beck, he paused. He said to tell you that those 90 seconds are going to bother him for a while. Tell him 90 seconds was fast, Nadia said. Some people never get there. She meant it. She'd been in situations where the person with nominal authority had never ceded it, had held it all the way down into the consequence. The captain had done the right thing in a stressful and unusual situation while maintaining control of his aircraft. She didn't take that for granted. She shouldered her bag. Daria walked with her into the terminal proper, the others falling in behind, and for a moment they moved through the morning crowd of the concourse together, the maroon berets and the woman in the gray hoodie and the trail runners, and people moved out of their way in the automatic way that people move out of the way of a group that walks with collective purpose and carries something invisible but felt. Dennis survived. She found out 3 days later, not from the airline or from any official channel, but because Marcus, the flight attendant, had gotten her email from the airline's passenger manifest, a thing that required forms and authorization, and apparently his supervisor's personal intervention. TPA administered in the window. Some right-side weakness, but neurological team says full recovery is likely. He is asking who ran the medical in the cabin. Can I give him your email? She wrote back, yes. His name was Dennis Kwan. He was 57, a financial analyst. Returning from a conference in Phoenix, he had a wife named Linda and 2 daughters who had been in Chicago waiting for him. He wrote to her in a long email that took the tone of a man who'd been sitting with a thought for days and needed to give it somewhere to go. Watch the news coverage. There was news coverage, apparently. Louis station that had caught the divert and the PJ team at the gate and run a segment and had understood for the first time what had been 5 yards away from him in seat 24C on flight 3300. He wrote, I've been told that there's a window for TPA, the clot-busting medication, of somewhere between 3 and 4.5 hours from onset, and that we landed 49 minutes after you first noticed something was wrong. I've done the math. She didn't know what to write back to that. She sat with his email for 2 days, and then she wrote back, I heard a sound. That's all. Anyone trained to listen for it. The fact that I was on that flight was chance. The fact that I could help was 17 years of people teaching me what to pay attention to. He wrote back, you're wrong about chance. I don't believe in that anymore. She read his email a 3rd time, specifically the part about the TPA window. Tissue plasminogen activator, the clot-busting medication used in ischemic strokes, has a treatment window that is typically cited at 3 to 4.5 hours from symptom onset, depending on the imaging findings and the clinical picture. The window is not a soft guideline. It is the line between full recovery, partial recovery, and permanent disability. Dennis had presented to a stroke center with imaging within that window. He'd gotten the medication. The right side weakness he'd written about was real, but the neurology team was optimistic. 49 minutes from when she'd heard the thud to wheels on the ground. She ran the math the way he had. If the plane had continued to Chicago a further 1 hour and 40 minutes, the window would have been gone, the medication would not have been an option. The outcomes listed in the clinical literature for missed ischemic strokes, treated outside the window, were not outcomes she wanted to describe to a man with a wife named Linda. She sat with that arithmetic for a long time. Then she put the email in a folder she labeled with his name and went for a run. She started teaching a new segment in the community college EMS course the following month. It was not on the syllabus. The department chair gave her 40 minutes at the beginning of the 2nd week of the program, a small favor to an adjunct instructor with an unusually specific professional background. And she used all 40 minutes talking to 19 and 20-year-old paramedic students about what it felt like to run a medical emergency in a completely non-clinical environment. She talked about the acoustic signature of a body losing consciousness, the specific thud, the specific quality of the silence that follows. She talked about the hierarchy of confidence and how to navigate it when you are not the person with official authority and the person with official authority is wrong. She talked about what high-flow oxygen looks like when it starts working and what it looks like when it doesn't. She talked about the difference between what you can do and what you're prepared to do, and how the distance between those two things is measured in training hours and repetition and the willingness to be in the worst possible version of a situation. She talked about the moment when Beck had told her to sit down. "What did you do?" one of the students asked. "I kept working," she said. "Did you argue with him?" "I told him what I saw and what I needed." That's not an argument. An argument is when you're trying to persuade someone of something that requires their agreement. I wasn't interested in his agreement. I was interested in the patient's blood pressure. There was a silence in the room. The good kind. "The person with the most relevant training has the obligation to act," she said. "That's the whole job. You will encounter situations where the person with institutional authority doesn't recognize your clinical authority. Sometimes they'll be wrong in a way that doesn't matter. Sometimes they'll be wrong in a way that kills someone. Your job is to know the difference. State your case once with precision and without apology, and then do what needs to be done." She paused. She had the beret in her bag, under the table where she was sitting. She'd started carrying it again. She wasn't entirely sure why. It wasn't a uniform she was entitled to wear in any official sense, and she wasn't the type to perform military identity for civilian audiences. But it was there, and it had a weight she found useful to remember. "You don't know who's going to be on the plane," she said. "You don't know when the moment comes, so the work is now. Before the moment, the work is always before." There is a photograph taken by a passenger on Flight 3300 that was on the local St. Louis news for a week, and then drifted into a wider feed and spent several days circulating through corners of the internet where people who care about such things trade images of competence and grace under pressure. In the photograph, Nadia Okafor is standing in the jetbridge at Lambert St. Louis International. Gray hoodie, trail runners, her left hand gripping the strap of her carry-on bag, her right hand holding a folded maroon beret. Behind her, 5 people in duty gear. In front of her, open terminal. The morning light is coming through the concourse windows behind them and hitting the polished floor in long, flat angles, the kind of winter light that has no warmth in it, but is very clear. She is not smiling, exactly, but there is something in her face that is not quite the flatness of a person who has just been through something hard. It is closer to the expression of someone who has just confirmed something they already knew, who has just done something they were built to do, and who is standing in the morning with that knowledge resting in them. Beck had told her to sit down. The captain had overridden him 14 minutes in. Dennis Quan had lived 4 words that others may live. She'd worn them through 17 years of deployments and extractions and nights in the backs of helicopters over denied territory. And she carried them now in a gray hoodie and trail runners on a Tuesday morning in St. Avery. Louis, in an aluminum tube full of strangers in the only way they'd ever been meant to be carried, in full. She teaches EMS on Tuesday mornings, now in a classroom in Denver with 19-year-olds who don't know yet what they're going to find in the worst moment of someone else's life. She runs the segment, she added to the syllabus, and she tells them, "You don't know who's going to be on the plane. The work is now. The work is always before." And if you ever board a flight and hear a sound that isn't right, and a woman in an old gray hoodie 2 rows forward is already standing up, let her work. She knows what she's doing. If this story gave you something, share it, leave a comment about the moment that hit hardest, and smash that like button so more people find it, subscribe, and stay with this channel. Every story here is about the person who was built for the moment they didn't ask for. There are more of them coming. Stay with us. They deserve to be told.